Good afternoon. It's Friday, the 9th of June, 2023, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Mike Robinson. Joining me today in the studio, Patrick Henningsen. Welcome to the programme, Patrick.
Great to be with you, Mike.
And we got Vanessa Beeley joining us from Damascus by video link. So we're going to get kicked off here with, well, the wonderful Rishi Sunak. Here he is, arriving at the White House, of course, a couple of days ago. He's been in the country for a few days and doing all kinds of things. Joe Biden managed to walk around the sofa there without tripping over this time, Patrick, and to sit down without tripping over again.
It's got tremendous gravitas, Rishi Sunak does.
Well, it's so much gravitas, in fact, that Biden thought he was a president, so he called him Mr. President while he was there.
There you are.
But anyway, the outcome of this fantastic event was the Atlantic Declaration. This is all about securing our future. This is their graphic to promote it. It's a fantastic piece of work. So let's just have a look at the key points from this. So they're saying, first of all, they're going to reduce vulnerabilities across critical technological supply chains. That means chilling effect on China, right? That's just to translate that. Support the critical clean energy industry and our net zero ambitions. So we're looking forward to seeing that in action. And then we're going to keep Russia out of the global civil nuclear power market.
Fantastic. So Chinese, freezing Chinese out, deindustrialization, and keeping, again, more tariffs and sanctions and so forth.
And making sure Russia can't provide any energy to the rest of the world.
So balkanizing the global economy and deindustrialization.
Absolutely. It gets better. Here we go. Research collaboration on AI, future telecoms, that's 5G and 6G, quantum computing, semiconductors, and engineering biology. That's genetic sequencing.
Genomic sequencing,
yes.
Biosurveillance.
All that stuff, yes.
Global leaders is Global Britain on this.
100%. And finally, designating the UK as the domestic source within the meaning of Title III of the Defence Production Act. So that means that British defence companies can get involved in US defence contracts. So there you go.
So is Britain taking the American colony back, or is America absorbing Britain as a 51st state?
This is a very good question.
Which is it?
That is a very good question. Now, one of the key focuses on this was AI, of course. So naturally, Britain is now going to be hosting the first major global summit on AI safety, and that's going to be this autumn. So we're going to make sure that AI is safe. And this is because the importance of like-minded allies and companies working to develop an international framework to ensure the safe and reliable development of the use of AI is key to the processing of data and so on, as we're going to come on to in a second. But guess what? Palantir has said that it is going to make the UK its new European HQ for AI development. So what does this mean, really? Well, it's about deregulation, isn't it? Of course, they couch this all in the language of safety. But this is about deregulation and making sure that the big AI companies can do whatever the heck they like at any particular time.
What does government want out of this, though? They want the automation that these AI applications are going to provide. That's automation for what? For anything you can imagine: censorship, interfacing with government, quote, customer service, and the list goes on and on. Data collection, data surveillance, etc.
Exactly. So that's why they've also announced what they're describing as a data bridge between the UK and the United States, because big data flows, this is really key. So what are they saying here? They're saying the UK and the United States have reached a commitment in principle to establish a UK extension of the data privacy framework, which would see the creation of a new data bridge between the two countries. US companies who are approved to join the framework, could be genomic sequencing, could be any kind of
surveillance,
biosurveillance, all that kind of stuff, would be able to receive UK personal data under the new data bridge, basically without restrictions. So it totally subverts data protections for the UK, for UK citizens.
Is that not a violation of GDPR?
You could say that.
Right.
We should make the point that there's already one of these agreements, which many people won't be aware of, with the Republic of Korea. And that means that UK businesses are now able to share personal data securely without restrictions with Korean companies. This is now going to happen with the United States as well. So lots of really positive stuff, if you'll excuse the sarcasm, coming out of Rishi's visit to the United States. And we shouldn't forget, of course, that one of the key things that he was there to do was to lobby for Ben Wallace to become the next Secretary General of NATO.
Oh, so he's shortlisted himself for the job.
Certainly.
It's the big job everybody wants.
He certainly has. It is the big job that everybody wants. He's up against Ursula von der Leyen, so we will see how that works out in the end. Okay, let me welcome Vanessa to the program. And well, the news from Syria, Vanessa, is you've got far from the United States, leaving the country, a new base being built.
Yeah, interesting news that came out in the last few days and has been sort of picked up and run with, although actually the US putting up new bases inside Syria, they have around between 24 and 28. Some of them are kind of non-permanent structures that they move around and reposition. Some, of course, are the bigger bases, the more permanent reinforced ones like Al-Tanef. So this new US military base that sort of cropped up in the last few days, I just wanted to talk about it in a bit more detail today. The positioning of it, banks of the Euphrates, east of the Euphrates River, very close to the Takbar Dam and the water pumping station. You can see the little American flag logo there. And it's in the village of Al-Swedia. And we've had reports of actually the SDF, the Kurdish Contra forces, being used to effectively ethnically cleanse the village on the pretext that villagers were demonstrating in support of President Assad and his historic speech at the Arab League summit. But they were basically chucked out of the village so that the US forces could move in. There's probably only between 50 and 60 actual military personnel in the base. And the US has previously had bases in this area, particularly when it was claiming to be fighting ISIS in Raqqa, which is about 40 kilometers to the east of the base. But the fact is that this base is being put here for a reason right now. And I just want to play this report from Kakhovka Al-Masyan of Syriana Analysis as a sort of introduction to what I'll then try to explain.
As if 24 illegal military sites were not enough, the US occupation forces are silently building a new base in Syria to reinforce its occupation of the oil-rich one-third of the country. While the US claims its presence in Syria is to fight terrorism, the remaining few ISIS pockets are all on the western shore of the Euphrates, which means on the side where the Syrian army and its allies are already stationed. In fact, there are multiple reports indicating that the US forces in Al-Tanaf border crossing are embedded with the same terrorists and allowing them to operate freely in the area and wage attacks on the Syrian military and civilian targets. The real reason for the US presence in Syria is part of Washington's economic war against Damascus through the occupation of oil and wheat fields to block the reconstruction of the war-torn country from the revenues of the oil and to weaponize the food basket against millions of Syrians. The policy, in short, is vile, evil, and sadistic. Now people are asking how to end the US occupation and theft of Syria's natural resources. There are reports of sizable Russian military convoy moving toward the east of the Syrian province of Deir ez-Zor. This Russian military deployment coincides with news reports stating that Iranian military equipment has arrived in the region and that the 17th Infantry Division of the Syrian army has been heavily building up on the banks of the Euphrates River. According to the Washington Post, which has close ties to the US regime, Iran is planning to escalate attacks against American occupation forces in Syria per a leaked document, which reveals a covert plan to kill Americans, which is seen as part of a larger Russian-backed strategy to oust US from Syria. But as the independent investigative journalist Vanessa Beeley asked, why the Washington Post need leaked documents or intelligence officials to inform them that Syrians do not appreciate the illegal occupation of one-third of Syrian territory, unlawful US military bases, regular kidnap and killing of Syrian civilians by US military, theft of oil and agricultural resources, on top of a 12-year hybrid war to topple the Syrian government using terrorist proxies. Could Washington Post or other US media outlets not figure out for themselves that the pushback against US violation of international law was inevitable, using the alliances that have supported Syria throughout history? I guess not.
And now what I want to do is just to give people an idea on the map, because when we talk about these places, I know it's very hard in your mind to locate it if you don't have the geography of Syria to hand. So the red circle in the middle is the new US base. As again, I said, it's relatively small, between 50 to 60 troops, short-range air defense batteries, and some armored vehicles. But of course, what is happening is this is happening at the same time that Russia and Syria are building up troops in the same area. The gold circles are ISIS holding camps. We know that the US transfers them from those camps into Iraq and into areas of Syria to carry out attacks against Syrian Arab army positions and against civilian positions. There's been an increase in attacks since the earthquakes in February. The grey kind of blobs in the red area is controlled by Syrian Arab army, but there are still ISIS terrorist cells within that area itself. So if you look at where the US base is, it has a direct line to the biggest US military base, illegal military base in Syria at Al Tanaf, which is also, again, a sort of recruitment center for terrorist groups, including ISIS, and it has a 55-kilometer exclusion zone around it. So Russian, Syrian troops, even civilians, can't enter that area. And there have been live fire exercises carried out by the armed groups, terrorist groups in that area, using even US military hardware like HIMARS, for example, that have an over 200 kilometer range. So in my opinion, and this is my opinion backed up by that of various researchers and military personnel here, that the US is trying to basically build a network on the territory that is still under the control of the Syrian Arab army. And this is quite interesting. This came out in May. I found it today from South Front. The US wants to build new base in Iraq's oil-rich western region. So let's see exactly where that is and how it ties into the new base in Syria. The United States is planning to establish a new base in the western Iraqi province of Al-Anbar. An Iraqi security source told local news outlets on May 23rd. The unnamed sources suggested that the US wants to establish a presence in Al-Anbar, which borders both Syria and Jordan, because it hosts some of Iraq's richest oil and gas fields. The security situation in the province, which was once considered a stronghold of ISIS, has allegedly improved significantly in the last few years, according to the source. Now, the US maintains some 2,500 troops in Iraq and probably a similar number in Syria, although they tend to downplay it. And recent Iraqi news outlets revealed a plan by the US to further expand its presence within the Ain al-Assad air base, which is located in Al-Anbar. So there you see also an increase in US military in Iraq, and let's see how that ties in to the idea of a direct route to the US base now close to Raqqa and close to the water pumping station of Takbar. And this is important because not only is the US controlling oil and agricultural resources, but Turkey, another NATO member, has control of the majority of the water that enters both Iraq and Syria. So the US being close to the pumping center is also potentially a risk for Syria. And here you have, it's virtually a direct line from Al-Anbar to Tanaf to the US base in the center there. And so that means that arms that come into Anbar, for example, the airbase at Anbar can be used potentially in coordination with Al Tanaf and the US base in the center to carry out attacks if there is an escalation between Syria and her allies and the United States.
Okay, thank you, Vanessa, for that. Okay, let's move on to Ukraine now, Patrick.
So a little update on what's going on with the Ukraine conflict here. We have a few developments this week. I know you mentioned some of them earlier in the week on your program. We're going to hopefully expand on some of that here. So one of the big stories, obviously, that's been brewing forever is the much anticipated spring counteroffensive. So we're past spring now, and it's finally arrived, Mike. The counteroffensive, we're told, has begun. Only it's summer, but anyway, a couple of months late. So let's take a look at this. This is even CNN, the fake news network, is being forced to admit Ukrainian forces are suffering stiff resistance and losses in assaults on the Russian lines. So, and we're talking about potentially significant losses in what's called probing operations along various insertion points along these front lines. The main area we're going to look at is around the Zaporozhye area here. And so just looking at the mainstream coverage, Mike, and there seems to be a type of a theme. I mean, look at this image. Ukraine strikes back, crossing the fingers, hoping for the best. So, this is the big counteroffensive that everything is supposedly hinging on here. Read this quote here from the subtext on this article. The next few weeks will determine the future not only of Ukraine, but the entire security system of Europe. The time has come to make a decision, Mike. So not very confident, apparently, by the imagery on the security system of Europe, and certainly not confident about Ukraine's prospects militarily here. So that's the Economist voice of the deep state. So let's take a look at the spring counteroffensive now in the summer. So we'll look at this. Now, these are estimates, Mike, that we put together.
Well, before we do that, we've got to look at the tank situation because, of course, the story about the Leopard tanks has been running through for a while.
And, sure.
So Bild now has decided to publish some of the footage of this Leopard tank being blown up by the Russians. So this is being admitted in, well, what is it being admitted? It's being admitted in the German press, in Bild at least. But where else? Not really anywhere else. It's certainly not in any of the British media and so on. So Forbes is really the only other Western media that's covered this. And this was yesterday. I think the Russians just destroyed their first Ukrainian Leopard 2 tank, is what Forbes was reporting. But just a couple of days ago, we had this type of thing in the Mail and everywhere else. Russia boasts it's destroyed Leopard tank, but is mocked by analysts who say they've actually blown up tractors. So the story, the Western story was, don't worry, nothing to see here. Leopard tanks all still functioning as they should be because, in fact, Russia was blowing up farm machinery and claiming it was tanks instead. Well, one or two only Western outlets are now admitting that, in fact, that's not the case, that Leopard tanks have been blown up, as you would expect, by shelling. But the vast majority, certainly the BBC and no other British press is covering this story at all. They're in complete denial, it seems.
Sure. Military analysts have looked at that footage that you just showed, Mike, and noted the columns of tanks just kind of being used as target practice by Russian artillery.
Right.
And a lot of people are questioning the fact that these are obviously the trained, especially trained Ukrainian forces that have been spending the last 2 months or 3 months being trained in Europe on these very combat techniques regarding these very tanks. And some of this new equipment is supposed to be cutting edge training, right? To NATO standard, and they're getting wiped out straight away. And so where are the replacement drivers for these German tanks if they're losing
where are the replacement tanks?
Can they go from the Challenger into the Leopard and then back to the Abrams? And so again, the chopping and changing of all this equipment is not really a recipe for success, apparently. But back to the spring counteroffensive here, and you can see Zelensky commiserating with his sugar daddy, Joe Biden, there from their recent visit. So let's take a look at this. This is now, what we've done, Mike, is amalgamated Russian MOD with Rybar. And I've looked at other Russian Telegram channels, and the numbers are more or less in this ballpark. You cannot get accurate figures here. You have to go by the credibility of past claims and looking at a multitude of sources here. Looking at past claims, these numbers tend to be pretty consistently accurate compared to other Western sources that tend to really underplay losses.
And certainly nothing from the Ukrainian side is in any way accurate.
Oh yeah, they've lost nobody. They've lost no tanks. It's all going swimmingly well. That's Kiev's party line. This is the first 72 hours. Again, not just in Zaporozhye, but mainly this is where the bulk of the fighting is happening. So this is what we're looking at. Ukraine, 30,000 men positioned over 6 insertion points along these battle lines, okay? So far, the losses reported, according to those sources we've cited, an amalgamation are roughly 8,700 dead soldiers, okay? And this is, again, including other areas, including the fringe of Bakhmut as well, and other areas. 2,900, quote, missing. You could count those potentially as casualties. 4,000 hospitalized. Okay, so already, Mike, you're at 50% losses there, just in the first 72 hours. Okay, 33 tanks, 66 combat vehicles, a combination of different combat vehicles there. 30 howitzers lost. These are lost by Ukraine, and 4 fixed-wing aircraft that we've seen so far. Okay, so that's the first 3 days of the counteroffensive. If these are even halfway accurate, Mike, it's not going well. It's not going well. And considering everything is hinging on this counteroffensive, the future of funding, et cetera, from the West. So we'll move on and see where the analysis takes us next, Mike. But you mentioned this in the previous program here. Anders Rasmussen, former head of NATO, basically saying that NATO is going to send troops into the Ukraine. He warns there. Now, this statement was immediately rebuked by the Ukrainian Foreign Minister Kuleba. He said there will be no NATO troops in there. So with the denials and the statements combined, I think there's a possibility that this could happen. So we're not discounting that at all. But so much is hinging on this. This is what Mark Esper is saying, former Defense Secretary of the U.S. This is his comment on this, on the big counteroffensive and what it means. Go ahead and roll this.
Significant moment. Everybody is looking to Ukraine to be very successful. You know, I was in Europe 2 weeks ago for about 2 weeks, and the number one question over there is, where is U.S. support? And everybody fairly thinks that if Ukraine does well, U.S. support will continue. If not, it could wither. And if U.S. support withers, then a lot of other countries will go with it. So it's very important, I think Ukraine understands this politically, not just militarily, that they have a very successful counteroffensive that shows people a return on their investment in the Ukrainian military.
I mean, this is so craven and crass, isn't it? A return on their investment. So look, we just showed you the casualties. We just showed you the dead soldiers. I mean, you're looking at potentially by the end of next week, 15,000 dead Ukrainian soldiers, and Mark Esper, that's a return on the investment. They've already got $37 billion earmarked for the next round of aid. The United States alone, $37 billion, various packages, arms, and financial assistance. So is the aid conditional on their performance on the battlefield? I mean, how far can the West go on this proxy war? Where's the upper limit for casualties, for dead Ukrainians? Soldiers. Is there an upper limit where it becomes this is an immoral conflict and we can't proceed any further and let's sue for peace? Is there such a limit?
Not as far as Western politicians are concerned. Not as far as the puppets in Ukraine are concerned.
Well,
Zelensky.
They're doing very well financially, and yes. I'm saying that has to be factored in as well. This is totally unprecedented in the history of modern international relations. We've never seen such a craven, mechanical proxy war like this, with completely arm's length and emotionally and morally arm's length as well by the West. I mean, incredible. A lot of people have a lot to answer for, I think, in Congress and also in the British Parliament as well. Yes. Forget about the EU. That's another story. So on the...
so in the meantime, of course, the dam being blown up by whomever is still in the news, and Britain really suggesting that this would be a war crime. I mean, let's forget the dams that were blown up during the Second World War. By who? By Britain.
Okay.
Right. So let's not...
And the dam in Syria attacked by the United States.
Right. Indeed.
With airstrikes.
But this would become a war crime because Russia, of course, is getting the blame for it. Now, as no doubt you're going to mention in a second, it has been on the receiving end of weaponry from the Ukrainian side over the last several months. But anyway, just before we move on, I wanted to highlight what Maria Zakharova was saying. I'm talking about what happened yesterday at the Kakhovka hydraulic
power plant.
Sorry, I've forgotten the hydroelectric is what I'm thinking of. This really should be a subject of worldwide study, research, and investigations. They're calling for exactly the type of inquiry into this event as with the Nord Stream pipeline. And of course, they're getting total rebuke from the rest of from the Western world anyway. But she went on to say the reaction of the West in all such situations is 100% predictable. It's an endless desire to blame Russia for everything. She's not wrong. The endless linking of all negative things that happen in Western countries in order to maintain the hysterical attitude of their own populations towards the situation around Russia. She's absolutely right there, but calling for a global investigation into this, which quick as a flash isn't going to happen. And in fact, Western governments already saying no way to that. But what's Kiev saying about it?
Well, this is the latest here. Kiev claims they have intercepted calls showing that Russia blew up the Kakhovka Dam. So this is shades of MH17.
Yes.
The SBU has intercepted calls. So we can't wait for the release on this. And we hope that the audio is non-doctored as the MH17 evidence that turned out to be not even admissible in the Dutch kangaroo court trial in The Hague. But hey, it's all in a day's work for the SBU. So that's what they're saying here. This is the latest. Obviously, they held back on this a couple of days before they released it because it was such bombshell intelligence. But so Russia did it. Here's the chorus, Mike, starting with our favorite, Jan Stoltenberg. The destruction of the dam puts thousands of lives at risk. This is an outrageous act. The brutality of the war crimes, etc. So he's saying Russia did it. Ursula von der Leyen immediately weighs in after Jan Stoltenberg. Russia will have to pay for the war crimes committed in Ukraine. The destruction of this dam is an outrageous attack. So I think they both said outrageous, didn't they? No, I'm not sure. Yes, an outrageous attack. Civilian infrastructure, lives at risk, etc. Europe is mobilizing support with our civil protection mechanism. So I wonder what that is. What is the European civil protection mechanism? What could that be? White helmets or something, or rather? Okay, and this is the latest woke sensation. The leader of Estonia, Kaja Kallas, she's saying the terrorist state, Russia, is now turned water into a weapon, destroying the Kakhovka Dam. It's a war crime, she says. This is ecocide, she says. She's coming from the green angle there. And mass destruction, etc. We must stop this cycle of aggression by helping Ukraine to victory and delivering full accountability. All sounds pretty good here. And of course, Zelensky weighs in, Russian terrorists. The destruction of the Kakhovka hydroelectric power plant only confirms the whole world what we already know, Russians are evil, etc., etc. And so there he goes. It's more platitudes from Zelensky, straight out of the CIA script writing department there. I'm sure they're managing his Twitter account very well. So Michael Tracy stumps all of them here. Another round of Russia keeps blowing up its own critical infrastructure for reasons that no one can explain, according to allegations. Russia's novel strategy for prosecuting the war is to bomb itself constantly. So I'm with Michael Tracy on that one here. But let's take a look at some key data points. Well, it turns out that this is the UN Security Council here, dated October 21st, 2022. The Russian delegation raised this very issue that Ukraine was targeting this dam and using it as a military target here. And they warned about all the potential problems that could arise from such attacks. So this is on the record. Okay, another data point here, December 2022, Washington Post. Complaints here, even the Washington Post admits it, Ukrainians using U.S. HIMARS rockets to strike the floodgates at the dam, at the Kakhovka Dam, same dam, Ukrainian forces. So this has been a military target For months, as you said before.
Well, the key point here is that the evidence seems to be showing that it took quite some time from the point of, because nobody actually knows which attack may have done the damage that finally caused it to collapse, but it's been in the process of collapse for an extended period of time. So for all we know, it could have been that event which caused the eventual collapse. So
there's also the underwater demolition possibility, a la Nord Stream pipeline.
Right.
That's also certainly, there's teams on NATO's side that are perfectly capable of putting mines or mining underwater on that dam. So, and also there's a potential of sabotage from the inside as well. So there's a lot of different possibilities there. So let's take a look at this. So who benefits from this? Well, it's worth pointing out, these are just a few data points. This poses a risk potentially to the Zaporozhye power plant's backup power system. That's for the cooling, very important in terms of reactor meltdowns. Threatens freshwater supply to Crimea. That can't benefit Russia, can it? I don't think so. And Russia forced to move back from defensive positions along the flood line. That can't be a benefit to the Russian forces, and Russian mine positions have been lost, which they fortified in those areas. So, these are just a couple. There's many more we could add to this list, but this idea that Russia did it because somehow they benefit, again, from blowing up critical infrastructure, which seems to be a kind of a talking point. Nobody really questions this in the West, but obviously the evidence doesn't point there. Now, Tucker Carlson also weighed in on this issue, and we should note that he launched his first episode of Tucker Carlson on Twitter, hit 100 million views, Mike, breaking the records for any such TV format episode ever. So this was huge. Whether he'll get those numbers in the future, we'll see. He put out episode 2, I think, this morning.
Okay.
He's had his second one out. But he made a claim about this dam. Let's listen to what Tucker said about this issue and the Nord Stream pipeline, and we may even fact check it. But go ahead and roll this.
So really, once the facts start coming in, it becomes much less of a mystery what might have happened to the dam. Any fair person would conclude that the Ukrainians probably blew it up, just as you would assume they blew up Nord Stream, the Russian natural gas pipeline, last fall. And in fact, the Ukrainians did do that, as we now know.
Do we know that?
Do we know that? I don't know. I don't think we do know that. It seems to me the evidence points to NATO blowing up the Nord Stream pipelines. And again, I'm not even convinced that Ukraine blew up this dam. I think it's possible that we have, we have SAS, we have special boat services, we have Navy SEALs on the NATO side, all capable of sabotage operations and doing it totally in a clandestine way. So we'll fact check Tucker Carlson here on Twitter, and we said that no, we don't know. Rather, the evidence suggests that the U.S. NATO blew up the Nord Stream pipelines. I cite Seymour Hersh, and also a report which we released at 21st Century Wire that really shows clearly that this type of operation can only be done by really advanced teams. And there's only a few countries in the world that have the critical equipment to carry out such a mission. And certainly it's not going to be a 50-foot sailboat called the Andromeda and some pro-Ukrainian rogue people on a pleasure cruise. It's just not plausible. So I don't know what Tucker Carlson's referring to there, but we're just putting that out there as a little bit of a nudge for Tucker.
Okay. And Vanessa, let's come back to you then. And Germany, and we've got a question over German support for ISIS.
Yes. So this is Stefan Schneck, the special envoy for Syria from Germany. A member of the Green Party, which should already set off alarms, as they are the primary party to have supported terrorism in Syria and Nazism in Ukraine. But let's see what he tweeted out yesterday, and this is quite extraordinary. This is craven terrorist apologism from the top German diplomat on relations with Syria, the special envoy. So basically, this is translated with the red circle is Abdul Basit al-Sarut. And this was on June the 8th. He said, "Today we commemorate Abdul Basit al-Sarut, the Syrian goalkeeper turned brave revolutionary. His life, with its ups and downs, paints a vivid picture of the complexities of the Syrian struggle and his legacy continues to inspire us. So let's have a look, Mike, at what legacy exactly continues to inspire Mr. Schneck. So this is Abdul Basit al-Sarut's incitement to genocide against Alawites, a Muslim minority sect inside Syria. He basically says, we're coming to slaughter you without an agreement. He's holding court here with a number of terrorist armed fighters. Here he's speaking to crowds. I think this was in Homs, yes, where again he's calling to exterminate the Alawites and the Shiites, telling them to leave. Here he's saying the message for the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, ISIS. He's calling for allegiance with Nusra Front, Al-Qaeda. Here again, we will exterminate the Alawites. The Shiites have to go. So this was another report in Al-Monitor. He also called for the genocide, basically, of Christians. Here he is with the ISIS logo. And of course, how did Western media present him as the singer of the revolution, leading rallies when peaceful protests broke out against Syrian President Bashar al-Assad in 2011? So quite extraordinary endorsement of ISIS terrorism here from the German special envoy. And I had a quick look this morning through his Twitter page. So here, this was previously a couple of months ago. Today, we remember Basil Shahada, the Syrian Christian director, producer, and activist who was killed by Syrian government forces in Homs in 2012. Now, it's worth noting, I spoke to Kivok Al-Masyan about him because I didn't actually recognize the name. But looking a little bit further into him, it appears that he came in to Homs at the same time as people like Dani Abdul Qayyum, who were proven to be producing fake reports. And I recommend, if people haven't seen this, that they go and watch the documentary that I made in collaboration with a Syrian journalist, Rafiq Latif, that basically exposed the majority of the narratives from 2012 to 2013 by CNN, Al Jazeera, Al Arabiya, etc., to have been very clearly staged. And then finally, let's look at one of the tweets that he put out more recently, which again is quite extraordinary. He says that we're concerned about the deployment of regime, replace that with government forces in Syria. The world was told that reconciliation was done, but violence did not generate peace and prosperity. No, what didn't generate peace and prosperity were the sanctions without UN mandate that the EU, UK, Turkey, and the US have imposed on the Syrian people. We call on the regime to stop violence against civilians. In reality, he knows damn well that the Syrian Arab Army is mobilizing against US forces that are occupying the majority of Syrian resources and against terrorist forces that he is obviously glorifying and lionizing in his tweets. He says the political path is the only way to achieve true reconciliation and peace. And we assume he's ready to support this long and difficult path by supporting the terrorist proxies that are trying to topple the Syrian government and who have massacred and carried out ethnic cleansing pogroms against the minorities that Sarut mentioned in his various speeches. This is craven. You know, this is from a high-level German diplomat, should be condemned on all levels.
Yes, thank you for that. Okay, if you like what the UK column does, you'd like to support us, please head over to community.ukcolumn.org. You'd be very welcome as a member, and we absolutely need your support. You could pick something up at the UK column shop, but please do share anything you find on the various platforms, especially ukcolumn.org and ukcolumnextracts.co.uk. Now, I just want to very briefly mention the latest comedy show from the BBC, and that is Mariana and Conspiracy Land. The first episode of this will be on Monday at 9:45. Now, normally the BBC puts their comedy programs on at 6:30 on Radio 4 every weekday, but for some reason they've decided to shift this one to 9:45 in the morning. So any people, if they want a bit of a laugh, may want to listen to that. This is going to be the first of 10 episodes, and I'm presuming that this is going to focus on the Light newspaper, but that is Mariana looking down the
Is that
rabbit
her,
hole.
or is that an AI rendering of her? Mike.
Well, it's certainly heavily manipulated.
He doesn't look like that in real life at all.
No.
It's just a weird image, isn't it?
Yes.
It's like looking down a whole septic tank. I don't know what she's
looking down, but anyway.
There. Anyway.
Let's move on to Julian Assange.
So this is the latest here. Julian Assange will fight a UK High Court decision and last legal option against extradition to the US. So big appeal coming up. Here's a tweet from Stella Assange, his wife. On Tuesday next week, my husband, Julian Assange, will make a renewed application for appeal to the British High Court. The matter will then proceed to a public hearing before 2 new judges at the High Court, and we remain optimistic that we will prevail and that Julian will not be extradited to the United States, where he faces charges that could result in him spending the rest of his life and then some in maximum security in the United States for publishing true information that revealed war crimes committed by the U.S. government. So those who committed the war crimes never arrested, never charged. Those who exposed the war crimes imprisoned for life, or in this case, held without any unconvicted prisoner now for years in Belmarsh prison. So they feel confident. They have a very good case. They have an excellent case. They have a great legal team. The only question, Mike, as we've said many times before, is the political will there in Britain to look at this on its merits rather than to continue to treat Julian Assange as a political prisoner? That's the question. Because at the moment, the system, the justice system, if you want to call it a justice system, is treating him as a political prisoner on behalf of the United States security state.
Yes.
That's the reality of it. I share her optimism. I think that the political winds have changed. The question is it enough to affect the decision by the judges? And I've always said what happens outside the courtroom will affect the decisions made inside the courtroom. It is not isolated. They're absolutely the political, the size of the protest, the amount of people that are concerned, that any media coverage will affect the decision inside.
And will the judges have the guts to stand up to the political pressure? Because undoubtedly they will be continuing to be under political pressure.
We'll find out. We'll find out if these 2 new judges are going to bring anything new to the table that the others didn't, that a lot of people would argue were completely rubber stamping decisions that were basically handed to them by Washington.
Okay, let's move on to more censorship related to, and the Twitter files. There's been new Twitter files information.
There was a new drop, and it's one of the most interesting drops so far. We'll call it a supplemental drop because it's really going into a deep dive on an organization that we know very well, Mike, and Vanessa also knows too. But let's look at this latest Twitter files drop here. And this features this organization, the Atlantic Council, very important organization, and all of their various offshoots like the DFR labs and so forth. So how did this whole disinformation network come together? Well, all is revealed from the emails from Twitter's servers. And in this case, we're going to look at the work here of Andrew Lowenthal. Now, I like his work because he comes from arguably the other side. He said he used to be with some of these organizations and left, and he's been very open about his past affiliations. And he feels like he's, by exposing them now, he's doing the public a great deal of service. But not only that, he understands these organizations very well. So he's basically one of the Twitter Files journalists here. He also understands power, and that's what I like about his drops, is he really gets how all the power converges here. So this is the latest here. Let's take a closer look here. He's calling it the no kidding decision makers, the anti-disinformation field, how it all got organized back when all these forces came together. 2018, 2017, very key period. Mm-hmm. You also have this timeline on UK Columns website as well. So some of this will be very familiar to you. Let's take a closer look here. Just pointing out some of the familiar faces. Jim Clapper, former head of U.S. intelligence, and of course Carl Bildt, a perennial Bilderberg attendee, former prime minister of Sweden here, just to name a few. So these are, again, spooks involved at the highest level. You got the heads of major PR firms as well. Facebook's represented, Microsoft, of course. It almost looks like, Mike, a breakout meeting for Bilderberg, if you really want to break down the guest list here. So they had this week these double summit. One was in Latvia, the other in Costa Rica here, 360 OS Summit. Okay, this is the Atlantic Council, and we'll look at this. So, you can see the types of people, Boris Johnson, Mike Pompeo, who the deep state will thrust as the Republican vice presidential candidate. He is the next Dick Cheney, representing the defense establishment here, Mike Pence, George Bush Jr., of course. These are the types of people that have been featured in the past with the Atlantic Council and DFR Labs. So this is really a privatized arm of the Central Intelligence Agency and MI6. Okay, so let's look at this double event here. And so they have their own situation room. Twitter also gives to these events as well previously under the previous regime. So big tech is part of the funding for Atlantic Council, along with the defense industry, along with finance and the energy sector, all of the things that U.S. Overseas imperialism, those interests they seek to protect and create markets for, those are the funders of the Atlantic Council and these types of events. Isn't that interesting? So let's take a look at this. They're also partnering DFR Labs with the Virology Project. They ran a lot of the censorship, as we showed previously, regarding COVID and vaccines. That's really important. Also, in addition to that, well, let's take a look at this. So these are the items which they were marked to be censored. Anything questioning COVID cases or COVID deaths, the lethality of the virus, we're talking early on in 2020, marked for removal, and IFR, spread, etc. Anything that provided anything different than the mainstream or the government narrative. Alternative remedies, treatments, that was marked for removal. Questioning the efficacy of masks, marked for removal. Vaccine efficacy and safety, marked for removal. Side effects of vaccines, deaths, and any post that creates, quote, vaccine hesitancy, immediately marked for either removal or what they called limited distribution, i.e. shadow banning.
Right.
So the DFR Labs, Atlantic Council, not just in the war conversation, they're also working on COVID and vaccines as well. And so this was the hub. This is the Global Engagement Center, which they are also partnering with. This is the State Department funded hub where all of the three-letter agencies could go and gain access to Facebook, Google, YouTube, Twitter, LinkedIn. Okay, so this is the main organizing hub that allows the deep state access into the censorship machine. We're calling this the censorship industrial complex here. Back to Andrew's Twitter files drops, and we'll look at this, the DFR Labs and the Global Engagement Center and Hamilton 68. So they're organizing these networks behind the scenes from 2018. And so sharing information, sharing blacklists, and Hamilton 68, just to remind people, I'll show you in a second here, but Clint Watts and the German Marshall Fund, again, State Department, Alliance to Secure Democracy, so anything that's Russian-related, Russian disinformation, a threat to democracy, this was all funded. And then they're coordinating with the Atlantic Council, the DFR Labs, all of those agencies we just showed you as well. And so Hamilton 68, just to remind people, that was, this is Matt Taibbi's drop here. That was my Twitter account marked for removal. Now, Twitter didn't remove my account, it turns out, because of Clint Watts and Hamilton 68, but I don't know that this same list wasn't acted on with Google, YouTube, and Facebook, which I can hardly post on for years now. So interesting. But there's a lot of other people on there that turned out to actually be real people and not Russian bots. So there we are. So that's at 21 Wired. Thank you, Elon Musk. We're back on the platform. And so here's the Costa Rican event, Mike. It's called RightsCon. See how they're framing this as a global meeting to secure the rights of people online, okay? So RightsCon, this is DFR Labs here. These are the sponsors. Look at the people involved with this. You've got DFR Labs, you've got Mozilla Foundation, you've got all the major cell phone carriers as well, the government in Sweden, Microsoft, Open Society Foundation. It's a who's who. Okay, so it seems like a good cause, right? And the Internet Society, ICANN as well for the URLs. So RightsCon, let's take a look at RightsCon. And you can see an internet free and secure. Sounds good. The speakers are very secure. You can see one of them is still wearing his mask this week. But let's look at what their actual program is here. An internet-free and secure initiative. Recommendations for human rights-based approach to cybersecurity. This is their main mission. And if you look on this website, you'll see all of their basically mission statement. I think it's 10 steps to secure people's rights online. So here's how they're framing it. Cybersecurity capacity building has an important role in enhancing and securing of persons both online and offline. Such efforts should promote, quote, human rights, respecting approaches to cybersecurity. How do you read through this, Mike?
So, well, it's the usual narrative. We're going to come onto this with respect to the EU, of course, because in order to shut down freedom of speech, we've got to support freedom of speech. This is the kind of language that they use. In order to enhance the security of people, we've got to basically lock everything up so that people can't express themselves properly and so on. But they're using cybersecurity and they're using other buzzwords like this in order to justify or to create the idea of some kind of threat that they have to act against.
And offline offline, so that's online harms.
Yes.
So again, it's bringing that language together here.
Yeah.
It all sounds wonderful, and it's very well funded, okay? So this is the way that they're approaching this through the Atlantic Council. Now, I want to point to something that a lot of people might not be aware of, okay? This is Aaron Berman. He is the head of Facebook's Trust and Safety, okay? And so we found this out in the previous Twitter files drop here. And so he's talking about his oversight board here with other tech companies. They have a board, they have their sort of Zoom meetings, which we'll show you one of those in a minute. So Aaron Berman, interesting character, right, Mike? He wants to prevent imminent physical harm from COVID misinformation, things like this. Let's take a look at here. To all my trust and safety friends at Twitter. So they're coordinating, either current and former. I hope that you know your work has made a difference. Thank you for everything you've done, whatever the future holds, says Aaron Berman, head of Facebook's Trust and Safety, community safety guidelines and whatnot, okay? Well, here he is here. Turns out he's former CIA. So he's not just any former CIA here, followed by Yoa Roth. So they're all working together here. Going to his LinkedIn profile, he actually was the CIA agent who would brief the president for his morning briefings, who moved straight from the Central Intelligence Agency, which arguably is a good job, isn't it? It's got a good pension, not the sort of thing that you'd walk away from for a big tech job.
I would say once an intelligence officer, always an intelligence officer.
It moves straight into censorship community guidelines at Facebook. Can you believe it?
Yes.
Alongside Nick Clegg and Ben Nemo.
Yeah.
Ben Nemo from the Atlantic Council. Okay, so let's establish that. Now let's look at their Zoom call here. This is with Aaron Berman and also from people from Twitter and I think from another tech company. And here they're talking about how to censor on COVID and shadow banning and why it's a great thing. Go ahead and roll this.
For some examples, we add labels on posts about COVID-19 and vaccines to show additional information from the WHO. When we do remove misinformation from the platform, which I'll talk about in a second, we built a tool so that we notify users who saw that misinformation before we removed it so that they have access to the authoritative information that corrects it. So that's in a large bucket our part of our inform work here. On remove for COVID-19, we do have a policy to remove harmful misinformation related to this topic. Specifically, we remove content that has been debunked as false and leading to physical harm by public health experts related to the pandemic. So these are things like fake preventative measures, claims the virus doesn't exist, or this also includes a variety of claims about vaccines. The idea here is to remove misinformation that could lead to imminent physical harm by somebody maybe not receiving appropriate treatment or exposing themselves to the disease. So on vaccines specifically, in December last year, we started removing false claims about the vaccine, again, that fall within this category. And we've expanded the list of claims we remove about vaccines in general earlier this year in consultation with health experts. And we're continuing to make updates to these policies as trends emerge, including just this week, in fact. And we also remove pages, groups, and Instagram accounts that repeatedly violate these policies to get at those entities that might repeatedly spread this content. And then finally, the third part of the strategy, addressing borderline content, which could lead to vaccine hesitancy, which falls into the reduce area. So we do reduce the distribution of certain content about vaccines that doesn't otherwise violate our policies. And our approach here is really grounded in guidance that we've gotten from health experts that who've emphasized the idea that overcoming vaccine hesitancy really depends on people being able to ask legitimate questions about safety and efficacy and get those questions answered by trusted sources. But at the same time, we also realize that certain of this content could lead to hesitancy. So we reduce its distribution.
So there's a CIA top guy reducing your distribution of your tweets and posts on Facebook, talking with the other big tech companies who are basically doing the same, right?
Yes.
He's reducing distribution, shadow banning. So what's the saying that they have? You have the right to speak, but you don't have the right to be heard.
That's right. Yeah.
Or so,
That's absolutely right. That's the principle. Yes.
Freedom
of speech, but no right to be heard.
No, yeah, freedom of speech, but not freedom of reach. Okay.
Yeah.
So it's not a conspiracy theory, of course. It's there. You have it from the horse's mouth. Okay. So that's to me, this is all very revealing. I know we're going back in time a little bit, but it's important that we establish the facts of history of what happened and people to understand how this whole network is constructed. Government absolutely actively involved. Now, we know about all this stuff on the U.S. side now. What's it like on the British side?
It's much the same. I mean, the key point here, Patrick, is Twitter under Musk is getting absolutely hammered by everybody, even today. And so we've got to understand the context of this to understand why they're so concerned about Twitter's approach to how he's running the organization. So anyway, of course, one of the people that is...
can I just add one thing?
Yes, go ahead.
While they've been spending all of this time censoring political speech and your evil COVID and vaccine hesitancy speech online, it turns out that Instagram has looked the other way with a huge pedophile network running openly on Instagram during this whole period. This has just broken the last 24 hours, this story. Okay, we haven't covered it. I'm sure you might. I hope you cover it on Monday.
Yep.
So they put all of their resources into censoring your political speech and your vaccine hesitancy, but they let organized criminal gangs run amok on Instagram openly during this whole time. Okay, where are their priorities when it comes to trust and safety? This is a good question.
Very good question. Now, let's just bring this on screen because, of course, everybody will know by now that the UK Health Security Agency has decided to launch a new heat health alerting system. So we've got to be really afraid. This is basically the message from them. We've got to be afraid of the heat.
Of the weather?
Of the weather, yes. So we've got yellow alerts in many parts of the country at the moment. They've set up an entire website to give us the details. So they've got, there's a yellow alert in the following regions. So they give some amber alerts going on as well. But there are no red alerts at the moment, so that should make us feel good. So just so you know, green means that there's no alert issued. Yellow means that these alerts cover a range of situations, but they're unlikely to impact most people. But amber alerts, they're particularly concerning because they may begin to see some health impacts. And then if you're a red alert, you're dead. It basically seems to be what they're suggesting. But
I feel a traffic light system coming on, Mike. That's what we need, a traffic light system
another traffic
for the
light
weather. And I think when should the lockdown be? Should it be between the amber and the red, or are you thinking maybe between even yellow and amber?
This is a good question. But look, if anybody's confused about the fact that basically everybody is going to go off to some very hot country in the next few weeks for a 2-week holiday, and they're not going to come back dead, if anybody's confused about that.
They might look like a lobster, but they're still alive.
But we don't have to worry because the UK Health Security Agency is telling us what we need to pack. Because they've put this little video out on Twitter this morning.
That's great.
So we've got to take our shorts and our swimsuit and our hat and our insect repellent and our sun cream and our condoms and a mosquito net and medicine. We've got to take all this.
This is fantastic. They've done this for us.
Because goodness knows, nobody knew how to pack for a holiday before. I mean, it's just incredible.
This is amazing.
Just incredible.
I feel like the money's being well spent.
Absolutely well spent. Well, look, I'm just going to skip through a couple of things here, which we'll put into extra. I just want to end on one little thing here, which is this quote. Now, I appreciate this is not really a Dostoevsky quote. It is absolutely not, but I just think it's very appropriate. I just want to remind everybody of it. the tolerance will reach such a level that intelligent people will be banned from thinking so as not to offend the imbeciles. I think that is not far away. If we're not there already, we're not far away from it.
Certainly not. Certainly not.
So look, let's leave it there. We've got a couple of things to talk about in extra, which we're going to do in a couple of minutes.
You don't want to show the Ellwood event?
We will do that. We'll do that in extra.
We still got time.
Okay, if you want, we'll do.
Absolutely.
We'll do the Ellwood event.
So this was, and I have to give a shout out to our friend Ben Rubin on Twitter, who shared this with me yesterday. So this is an event that turned up here, a New World Order featuring the Right Honorable Tobias Ellwood. And this is going to be in Salisbury. And I think this is coming up on June 23rd. So tickets are £20. It looks like a really exciting event, Mike. You'd think that this was an alternative event, but it's not. This is mainstream. And here it is here. I think the Arundel's charity there on their website here. So a New World Order with Tobias Ellwood. What could they be talking about? What do you think?
I think I would like to know what they're talking about, and I'd be very keen for lots of UK Column members to go along to that.
I think I'm going to get a ticket. What do you think?
I think that's
we should go.
Worth going to.
That's going to be fun.
Yeah,
that's going to be a lot of fun and informative too. So that's the full package. So yeah, that's coming up on June 23rd. Yeah, just go online, and it's going to be sold out. I'm telling you right now. Especially after today's news program. Yeah. But anyway.
Okay, let's leave it there. We'll be back in a few minutes for some extra. If you're a UK Column member, you're very welcome to join us there. Otherwise, we'll see you at 1 p.m. as usual on Monday. Have a great weekend. See you then. Bye-bye.